It began with a whisper and ended in thunder. A war that officially lasted just 17 days but never truly ended. A war fought between two nations born from the same womb of empire, whose rivalry would come to define an entire region for decades. This was not a war for conquest, nor a war for honor. It was a war over belonging, over a land that belonged to neither, yet was claimed by both. The war over Kashmir in 196, the 5th of May, seemed like a forgotten chapter today, a dusty page in the ledger of Cold War history, but its consequences still bleed into the present. Like an old wound that never healed. Why did Pakistan gamble everything in a war it couldn't win? Why did India, scarred by its defeat to China, fight with such ferocity? And why, after all the smoke cleared, did nothing truly change? This is the story of a war that answered no questions, but left generations haunted by them. The story begins in 1947, when the sun finally set on the British Empire's 200-year rule in India. The partition of India and Pakistan was one of the most violent and chaotic migrations in human history. As Britain exited, it cleaved the subcontinent into India, emerging as a secular republic with a Hindu majority, and Pakistan as a new homeland for South Asia's Muslims. But partition was rushed, ill-planned. Entire communities found themselves on the wrong side of arbitrarily drawn lines. Violence erupted on trains, in villages, across rivers and borders. Over 1 million people were killed. More than 14 million were displaced. But among all the wounds left by partition, one never closed. Kashmir, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, ruled by Maharaja Hari Singh, had a Muslim majority. But a Hindu ruler, faced with tribal invasions and internal pressure, the Maharaja chose to accede to India, a decision Pakistan saw as betrayal. This set off the First Kashmir War 1947-1948, ending in a UN-mediated ceasefire that created the line of control, effectively dividing Kashmir between Indian-administered and Pakistani-administered sectors. Yet no formal peace ever came. The UN called for a plebiscite to let Kashmiris decide their fate, but it never materialized. Instead, what followed was decades of diplomatic coldness and simmering hostility. By the mid-1960s, the stage was once again set for war. In Pakistan, President Ayub Khan, a military strongman who seized power in 1958, faced mounting dissent and internal instability. His solution: rally the nation around Kashmir. In India, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, who had inherited a deeply shaken nation after Nehru's death and the 1962 humiliation by China, had something to prove. Both nations now looked to the same icy mountaintops and valleys, with fire in their hearts. But this time, the stakes were even higher because the Cold War had arrived in South Asia. The global superpowers had drawn their own invisible lines. Pakistan, a formal ally of the United States, was backed through military pacts like SEATO and CENTO, receiving modern American tanks, aircraft, and training. India, stung by American ambivalence during the Sino-Indian War, tilted toward the Soviet Union, seeking support in a more non-aligned but pragmatic embrace. The Kashmir dispute was no longer local. It was a geopolitical flashpoint, an ideological battleground where imperial legacies, religious nationalism, and Cold War anxieties all collided. And then, in August 1965, Pakistan made its move. The operation was called Gibraltar. Its objective: infiltrate Kashmir with thousands of Pakistani-trained guerrillas, incite an anti-Indian uprising, and force New Delhi into negotiation or collapse. but it was a miscalculation of historic proportions. The insurgency never caught fire. Kashmiris, many of whom were weary of conflict and loyal to their own survival, did not rise up. Indian forces quickly detected the infiltrators. By the end of August, India had crossed the line of control, launching a massive counteroffensive. The 1965 Indo-Pakistani War had begun. At its heart, the War of 1965 was driven by illusions. For Pakistan, Operation Gibraltar was based on the belief that Kashmiris would welcome the infiltrators as liberators, that mass revolt would erupt against Indian rule. But this belief stemmed from flawed intelligence and wishful thinking. The Pakistani leadership, particularly General Akhtar Malik, was confident in his plan's success, yet reality defied expectation. The Kashmiri people remained largely passive, wary of becoming pawns in yet another proxy war. By the time the infiltrators were neutralized and driven back, Pakistan found itself cornered in desperation. It escalated again, this time with Operation Grand Slam. Launched on the 1st of September, this wasn't a guerrilla operation. It was a full-scale military strike. The objective was clear: capture Akhnur, a critical logistical bridge linking Indian-controlled Kashmir to the rest of India. By severing this artery, Pakistan hoped to cripple India's hold on the region. And initially, it worked. Pakistani forces surged forward. Indian positions buckled. Panic began to rise in New Delhi. But then, something changed. On the 6th of September, India made a bold strategic decision, one that defied expectations. Rather than continue defending in Kashmir alone, it opened a new front, marching deep into Pakistan's heartland. Aiming for the city of Lahore, this move stunned Islamabad. The war was no longer confined to Kashmir. Now Punjab burned at Gibraltar. One of the most decisive armored battles in modern history unfolded. Pakistani M48 Patton tanks, among the most advanced of their time, clashed with Indian Centurion and Sherman tanks in a brutal engagement. For 2 days, Indian troops, entrenched in defensive positions and aided by flooded terrain, annihilated Pakistan's armored advance. By the 11th of September, 28 Pakistani tanks lay destroyed. India lost only one. The myth of technological superiority had cracked. Elsewhere, near Chawinda, Pakistan's largest tank battle since World War II erupted, Indian forces pushed hard, aiming to sever Pakistan's rail links, but Pakistani troops dug in and, fiercely determined, mounted a bloody resistance. Neither side gave way. It was here that the war devolved into attrition. There were no sweeping victories, only stalemates soaked in blood. Meanwhile, in the skies above the subcontinent, a new kind of war raged. The Indian and Pakistani air forces engaged in dogfights, bombing raids, and airfield attacks. Pakistan's American-supplied F-86 Sabres and F-104 starfighters clashed with India's MiG-21S and Hawker Hunters. In sheer numbers, India had the advantage, but Pakistan's aircraft were faster and newer. The result was an aerial deadlock. One dramatic moment came when India bombed the Pakistani city of Sargodha, targeting air bases and causing widespread alarm. Pakistan retaliated with Operation Dwarka, a naval bombardment on the Indian coastal town of Dwarka on the 7th of September. Though strategically minor, it was symbolically powerful, demonstrating Pakistan's reach at sea. However, India's navy maintained coastal control, safeguarding merchant routes and preventing escalation on the maritime front. But on land, the real cost was mounting. Across the desert of Rajasthan and the mountains of Kashmir, Indian and Pakistani infantry endured scorching heat, freezing nights, and ceaseless artillery barrages. The toll was immense, thousands dead, many more wounded or missing, tanks burned, villages turned to rubble. Lines shifted, then shifted back, yet neither side gained decisive ground. By mid-September, exhaustion and uncertainty hung like a cloud over both capitals. Ammunition was dwindling. International pressure was intensifying. And all the while, the Cold War titans watched. The United States, once Pakistan's close ally, grew uneasy. Washington had supplied Pakistan with weapons for use against communists, not India. The fear of escalation in South Asia clashed with America's global priorities, especially as the Vietnam War escalated. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, stood cautiously with India. But Moscow, too, feared a wider war that could pull in Chinese forces or worse, ignite a superpower clash. For a brief moment, the Cold War paused to cool down the hot war in Kashmir. The United Nations intervened. Resolution 209, then Resolution 211, called for an immediate ceasefire. Global media reported the conflict as a dangerous potential flashpoint, with two nations racing toward mutual destruction for the second time in 2 decades. Finally, on the 23rd of September, both sides agreed to a ceasefire, but if the guns went silent, the conflict did not end. The ceasefire on September 23, 1965 did not usher in peace. It froze a feverish conflict in place. Troops remained stationed along the line of control, tanks rusting in fields of shattered earth, while artillery positions remained pointed at each other, silent but alert. The war had ended on paper, but in the minds of soldiers, citizens, and leaders on both sides, nothing had truly changed. Humanitarian material devastation. Casualties. India suffered approximately 3,000 fatalities. Pakistan around 3,800. Tens of thousands more were wounded or went missing. Equipment losses. Hundreds of tanks, artillery systems, aircraft, vehicles, and vital infrastructure were reduced to scrap metal or dust. Economic burden. The cost of mobilization and reconstruction drained both economies. Pakistan, already fragile, struggled to absorb the market shock. India, fresh from the war with China and economic headwinds, found itself financing yet another unforeseen campaign. These figures, however, obscure deeper wounds. Thousands of families on both sides suffered loss, trauma, and displacement. The borderlands of Punjab and Rajasthan, once lush agricultural centers, became uneasy frontiers of suspicion and fear. Trust lay in ruins. Political fallout, national narratives. Pakistan, post-war, saw Ayub Khan's star dimming. Its leadership hailed initial battlefield gains, but the failure to secure Kashmir coupled with heavy losses emboldened internal critics. The illusion of swift glory evaporated. India, though celebrating victories at Asal Uttar and in Punjab, felt uneasy pride. The war had not solved Kashmir. The Tashkent Declaration in January 1966, brokered by the Soviet Union and marked by handshake, gestures of peace, left many Indians feeling betrayed by concessions made for the promise of stability. Both nations drew their own narratives. Pakistan emphasized heroes and sacrifice, continuing to see Kashmir as an unredeemed quest. India emphasized military proficiency and resolve, yet remained wary and vigilant at its borders. Regional global repercussions. Cold War diplomacy. The war underscored how superpowers could still cooperate. The US and USSR found shared interest in South Asian stability proof that even ideological rivals could act as mediators when nuclear escalation became too dangerous. Kashmir, thus, became a Cold War pressure gauge. Military modernization. Pakistan invested in American heavy armor and aircraft. India expanded its Soviet-supplied arsenal and prioritized flexibility. Both armies learned from the 1,965 lessons later seen in the 1,971 confrontation and continuing nuclear standoff in the decades that followed. Nuclear reverberations. While neither side was nuclear armed in 1965, both accelerated clandestine nuclear programs. The lessons from this war escalation: border artillery, tank duels paved the way toward the ominous nuclear deterrence that defines Indo-Pakistani relations today. Yuga, social psyche, cultural memory. Across novels, films, schoolrooms, and songs, 1,965 became emblematic. In Pakistan, every soldier in uniform shuffling onto parade ground echoes the sacrifices made on that September battlefield. In India, anniversaries of Assault Uttar are commemorated subtle nods to engineering feats and tactical brilliance. But for both people, Kashmir remained the unresolved echo, a pain that never healed. The sight of drones watching over valleys, checkpoint guarding pass, and patrols pacing the razor wire reminded everyone of the wounds that refused to close. Lessons and unresolved questions. Some lessons were indispensable. Intelligence matters as much as firepower. Pakistan's gamble on insurgency collapsed from faulty estimates. Adaptability is key. India's decision to open a second front saved its strategic posture. Diplomacy, even amid gunsmoke, can shape outcomes. The Tashkent summit proved that international brokering could halt the tide, yet questions remained unanswered. How long can a war be ended, yet remain forever alive? How does a generation learn to let go of claims deeply etched in mythology and identity? Can the survivors of 1,965 imagine a different future, or are their hopes bound to the memories of that gun-smoke-soaked September? 70 years on, the Valley of Kashmir still lies within the same valley of paradox, a place where flags flutter higher, but hopes seem lower, a land where borders define identities but never belonging. India and Pakistan today are two nuclear-armed nations forever, on the verge of miscalculation. They hold all the power to destroy, but none so far to heal. So here's the final question, echoing from 1,965 into 2025. Is Kashmir a wound that can ever heal, or is it a mirror reflecting the truth both nations refuse to confront about themselves? The guns may be silent, the tanks may be buried under rust, but the story is not over. If you found this deep dive compelling, consider subscribing to Legacy Files, where history isn't just retold, it's relived.